But for argument's sake, we have to raise the middle of every conference. That was my argument, Jim, of like, let's go to 24 teams. So the donors are going to keep pouring into their rosters and their quarterbacks and their staffs, etc. Like they get to see it play out in the postseason. Okay, welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. College football is officially over. The Super Bowl is set. I'm your host, Yogi Roth. Today, joined by Jim Thornby. He's always there. He's just not always on the screen. His fingerprints are everywhere. And of course, it's presented by our founding sponsor, 76, keeping you on the go so you never miss a beat. Jim, today is the full recap, put a bow on the 2025-26 season. Before we get to that, how has the end of your season been? Like, have you finally been able to take a breath, take a sleep, take a nap?
It was kind of a blur because it didn't I don't know, I guess just, as you get older every year, each year moves faster. So it's like, especially like in those last few weeks of the regular season, you're just kind of like, wait, we're already at week 12? We're already at week 13? Like champ games next week? And I think what was cool, and we'll kind of dive into this in just a second, I think the 12-team format has created so much interest around every other program that I was paying attention to what North Texas was doing. I was paying attention to what, all these schools in the American and even James Madison to an extent, and, and looking in deeper, like all these games that would not have garnered much national interest, I think. And it might be just also relative to what my current role is, opposed to a previous role where it was just Pac-12, 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 Pac-12. And just, I think that level of everyone kind of has some chance, some obviously more than others, but it creates so much more interest, which is, I think, just good for the overall health of the sport. So I think that just made everything go that much quicker. There was no there's no games on at this time where I don't care about, or no, this one. There was always something on where you're just like, oh, let me see what this team's about, because they might be a team that is making it to the playoff.
Yeah, that's a cool perspective. Okay, so the framework for today, we are gonna brain dump on the season. So I got a full cup of coffee. Jim's on number 3 of the day, probably, knowing you. Yeah. And we're going to talk through the season. We're going to talk about the news that just came out on the 12-team playoff remaining. 12-team playoff, do we like it? Do we not? What do we like about it, etc.? Then we're going to go through the major conferences. We're going to talk about each one and kind of put a bow on their season. A couple things before we get started there. One, if you haven't yet, go to yoption.com, give us your email, subscribe to it. There's going to be some really fun content, especially around Sam Darnold for all those SC fans out there. Google Season of Sam. It'll be a fun podcast listen for you. We'll talk about that one for sure as we get to the Trojans. Also, Jim, you don't know this, but over the weekend, got my first victory as a 5-year-old basketball coach. That's right, folks. So by the end of this, if you haven't yet, especially if you're subscribing to us on social media, wherever you may be, hit subscribe, YouTube, social, you name it. Please send me in like a drill or a play for 5-year-olds. We have one out of bounds play, and it worked. We scored our first bucket of the season, Jim, in 3 games. We scored 12 points, and we got a win. So kind of like in the program, then seeing the guy walks out, and he's like, get to keep the house and the car for another week. Basically, I looked at my wife. She's like, you get to keep the job for another week. So we had a fun weekend, and it was the first weekend being home. I say that because we are recording this on January 20th. January 25th is the title game next year. I haven't even looked at how the calendar is laid out yet. I know the schedules are starting to release for teams. The Big Ten schedule will come out later this week. The Pac-12, I presume, will come out in the next coming weeks. We're seeing schedules be released. Notre Dame released their first couple games. That's noteworthy because I'll be calling games for NBC next year, which will be fun. So who knows where that will take us eventually. But overall, let's just start at this 12-team playoff, Jim. I've gone on the record saying I loved 24. I loved 24, maybe in the past tense. Why? Because I think that my alma mater, Pitt, or your alma mater, Arizona, or let's go Wisconsin or Nebraska, but anybody who sits 4th, 5th, 6th in any conference and is a proud football brand, you are paying an outrageous amount of money for your quarterback. level set on that, right? Reportedly, Dante Moore is upwards of like, I read 7. Confirm what you read?
No, I mean, that's the thing.
What?
Who knows? Like,
Okay, who knows?
I don't believe any one of those numbers ever.
Okay, I do believe though 4. I do believe 4 for Damon Williams. I do believe 4 Sam Levitt. I do believe like $4 million, which means like we're close to a $6 million quarterback, which means we're even closer to a $10 million quarterback. Like that's reality with where we sit. So my argument, Jim, was for those teams that I just referenced that you love and I love and some of our listeners love, you want a quarterback. So you're going to overpay because I think everybody's overpaying for a quarterback. So you're going to overpay. Let's just call it $2 million for a quarterback. But if you know that your margin of error is so slim because you're not one of the truest big brands in college football or one of the best rosters that either rev share, NIL, whatever can afford, then you know like you got it's tough sled. So how many years in a row are you going to spend $2 million on a quarterback? So the point is, and I don't want to call our favorite teams like the middle class, but for argument's sake, we have to raise the middle of every conference. That was my argument, Jim, of like, let's go to 24 teams. So the donors are going to keep pouring into their rosters and their quarterbacks and their staffs, etc. Like they get to see it play out in the postseason. Now, we know how this thing shakes. The SEC and the Big Ten commissioners, they're the ones that have to agree upon the format. 16 was on the table, 24 was on the table. Eventually, they all got moved off the table. We sit at a 12-team format with some intricacies. I know that they raised everybody's eyebrows in college football. I'm curious your thoughts of all 4 Power 4 champions guaranteed a spot and Notre Dame guaranteed a spot if they finish in the top 12. So what would that have meant in this year's most recent playoff?
Yeah, so if you would have looked at that's the point right there. You look at how would these tiny tweaks, because it is still the 12-team format, and now we're going to be going into now a third year of a 12-team format with a different format in each year of those 12-team formats.
How about that? Say that 3 times.
Exactly. That's a tongue twister. But so what you would have seen is the ACC champion Duke would have gotten in. James Madison would have been the team on the chopping block there. Does that matter? I think it does. I think for me, I think it's still going back to what I said earlier and the overall growth of the game. It created interest in what was going on in the Sun Belt because they were ranked higher than Duke. Like, why shouldn't they be in the tournament over Duke? Nothing against Duke, but I mean, like, what did Duke, other than winning that one game over Virginia in the championship game, what did Duke really do to deserve to be in the title game? And the other change, which would have been now in retrospect would have been pretty crazy, is that Notre Dame would have gotten in over Miami. Obviously, that was a big to do at the time that, you know, Miami finally jumped them or whatever else like that. And not a lot of people were giving Miami, myself included, enough credit when they got in that they would do the damage that they did and make it all the way to the title game. Obviously, they had some talented players, but there was enough games this year where you saw with Miami, you were just kind of like, I mean, the 2 losses that they had, both games were just really sloppy. Like, I think, what was it? Carson Beck had, in those 2 regular season games, Carson Beck had 6 interceptions in those 2 regular season losses. So, I mean, when you look at it right there, I think it's the continuing narrowing of power in this sport in what is now going to be the Power 4 versus everybody else. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's a little interesting for the Big 12 and the ACC because how long before what is happening now to these other conferences will all of a sudden the lens shift as the finances are going in such a crazy direction for the Big Ten and the SEC above these other 2 conferences until they start to go, okay, well, why are we doing this for you guys? You guys are, you know, below us and trying to go. So I'm almost a little bit surprised, maybe not so much, but a little bit surprised that maybe the Big 12 and the ACC aren't kind of keeping that other half of college football. What it is, it's half of college, you know, at least at the FBS level, half of college football kind of more on their side. But maybe the horses are out of the barn on that one. Like maybe there's no coming back.
Do you think that the Big 12 and the ACC should then because what I'm hearing you say is like, well, why don't we threaten to like break off and take everybody else? And we create our league. Can the Big 10 and the SEC create theirs?
somewhat, but also like I don't feel like I feel that like that's probably too far a move. I don't know what
Yeah.
I don't know what the right strategy is right there, but I feel like it's when you're pushing down on the rest of them, like if there's some way that they can kind of continue to carry around everybody else so that when it's, what are there, 10 conferences in FBS, now you have 8 against 2 instead of 4 against 6. And as if those six start to drift off, then it's 2 against 2. And those other two are making so much money
Yeah, it's a
that they
different
just,
world.
yeah.
I'm smirking because I'm like, for those that are listening on audio here, I'm smiling because I'm like, I wish people could just see Gemini's text threads because the detail around this is amazing, as are the emojis and the GIFs or whatever they're called, GIF, whatever it is. To that point, that's why I thought there would be more buy-in for the automatic qualifiers. Because to your point, and I strongly believe that every conference should dictate what their best is and present that. So like these 4 automatic qualifiers from the P4 champions, like I really like that. Like, hey, if Duke gets in and they won 8 games and they won the conference championship, good. Present your best, ACC. Like I think it's too hard without like any overarching governing body, individual, commissioner, whatever the heck we want to say. All these conferences, send in your best. Send in your best. And I thought we would end up with an expanded playoff, Jim, because when I looked at the ACC and the Big 12 and the reality of number of teams in, or really the number of teams that didn't get in, I thought they would kind of have pushed for some automatic qualifiers that come from the league. And then we can pool, like, so let's just say it was BYU and Texas Tech from the Big 12. They both get in because you get 2 automatic qualifiers. Good, done. And then if it's Utah as the 3rd team in that league, or Arizona State, well, then they're in a smaller pool of at-larges for the committee to decide. I do think there's some truth to, and I'm not like on the hill of like the committee's horrible. We've done the mocks. We know those people, the CFP, too well to just be that whatever. Like I'm just not going to go there. Like they bust their tail to try to get it right. But I think it's really hard to get it right. I love that everybody's going to play 9 conference games moving forward. Like that's going to be great. Finally, we have a little equity in that regard. But man, I would have loved to have seen those leagues be like, yep, it's going to happen anyway. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to get 3 or 4 every year, no matter what. It's just the truth, folks, like that. And I think it's truth for also how they play, having been in the Big Ten. And I say that of like, I always, Jim knows this because again, I go back to our text thread. I've never been a fan of like crowning a conference. This is the best conference based on just the title game. I've always felt that's not nuanced enough for the truth. And part of that is the trauma from working in the Pac-12 of like 9 conference games. Utah and Oregon, for instance, would play in week 11 versus Alabama versus the Citadel. Like there's a lot of arguments, but then you have a champion and you crown them and they kind of take the league with them. I do think, though, being in the Big Ten the last 2 years and covering the country and going to Tuscaloosa and really widening my lens on college football, the Big Ten is the top conference. When I look at the teams and how they play, and I look at the incoming quarterbacks last year, and then the offensive linemen and the 3 Joe Moore Award finalist teams, like I think that is the truth. And I think that it's only going to continue to grow. Like the floor is so high. Look at Northwestern, Chip Kelly, Jerry Neuheisel. They're going over to run that offense. Like Northwestern, if you want to call them in the middle of the league because they went to a bowl game and won it. Minnesota is always a tough out. Purdue's only going to get better. They were at the very bottom. Look at Indiana 3 years ago. Now they're national champions. Like I do think there's truth there. And I also don't think it's like by a country mile. But I think the perception is that wide right now. So that's where I thought those other 2 leagues would have fought for expansion and give me at least 2 seats at the table. And if it's 16 or 24, give me 3 seats at the table. Like whatever was on the table. I'm not going to pretend to know in the 2014 model, but I thought it gave those conferences a better chance because I think we have to give the ACC its credit of what Miami did. Barely in to national championship game.
Yeah, and we're going to go kind of conference by conference as we move along here. But I do want to get, before we move past that, I do want to stay on this and say, I am kind of more a proponent of the 12 team. I really like the way that this last year, with the way the bracket worked out with everything. I mean, we're still at a point where Indiana is the only team that has
Ever.
gotten of the 8 teams that have gotten a first round bye the last 2 years. Indiana is the only one that's won a single game. Never mind go on to win the national championship. Like the first year we had the number 8 seed and the number 7 seed, and then in the championship game this year it was number 1 against the 10 seed. So like I and to that point I was making before, the 10 seed Miami, that was further than I anticipated a 10 seed going. Not that I think there's only so many teams every year that can actually make it this far. The 10 seed was a little bit surprising to me to get to that realm. Now, if it does expand, I would still like it to continue to be an all of college football type of lens
100%.
through that. No offense to the SEC or Big Ten, but I don't need to see your 8th best team in whatever playoff format we get over one of the smaller conference champions. It just makes that whole thing, it creates more interest throughout the whole thing. We saw, this year was, giant ratings for the Indiana winning the title. I think people had started to maybe get a little bit like, oh, it's Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia every year, and to have this. And I think there was probably a lot of interest in just can my school do this if Indiana does this?
Yeah.
I think there was that part of it that was, I'm going to be a doubter until they win the national championship, and now I'm not the doubter anymore. But now I'm like, why can't my school do this?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Okay, well, tell me if I'm wrong. You know this better than me. Will be 12. We don't know anything beyond that, right? Like we're kind of living year by year, which I don't think is great for our sport. I also think like the reseeding in the NFL, I didn't even realize that until like a couple weeks ago. I was like, man, they've always been doing that. I think that's great. And the home games are great.
Locked into the college games so much
Totally.
during January still.
Totally. And I think what Dan Lanning said before the semis of like, there's no reason college football title should be January 25th. Like we're 3 weeks into the next semester. Like it's a mockery of the academic side of it. Like that to me just needs to change on so many levels. I mean, think about if you're Fowler and Herbstreit next year calling the title game, you're going to have rosters and it's going to be like Jim Thornby at left guard starting for Arizona. After this game, he's going to be heading right to LA to play for the Trojans. That to me is just not good for the sport. And I'll finish with this before we get into the Big Ten. We'll start there. This is a thread I have with multiple head coaches, and it's been the same for 3 years now. The minute the final game ends of this magical season, in comes a dark cloud. And in the NFL, when the final game ends, yes, there is, what do they call it? Like Black Monday, right? Like when all those coaches get fired and a lot of movement happens, but the games end. And yes, when the Super Bowl is over, then free agency begins. Like it's not a dark cloud. It's actually a rainbow, and it's entertainment, and it's enjoyable. And we want to track it. Now it's like, who's backstabbing who? Darius Mensah did this, and Damon Williams did that. Like it's such a black eye. And I think if we're going to keep like lifting up the idea of taking care of athletes' mental health and being a part of a growth of a young man into a real man, like all the cliches that I love and believe in, Jim, with all of my soul. It's why I love college football. I'm with Cignetti. I'm a college guy. I just think that we have to change that because it only makes it easier to hate and to throw vitriol and make judgments about players. Like Damon Williams is going to have a tough run in this offseason in Seattle, and he's going to have to make amends, and he will. But my point is that like the system didn't help him out, and he has to wear the decision 1,000%. And his agent does. His former agent obviously moved on, but his family, like everyone involved in that. But I think there's a way where we can mitigate some of this for the coaches, for the Jed Fishers of the world that are rumored for every job. That to me, I haven't found one coach that doesn't agree with that. And again, here we are in coaching season, Venice Beach, California, man. Meet me at Scopa tonight. I'll be the coordinator every night this week. Like this is what the conversations all surround the same thing. So let's see if we can move forward. All right. So before we all move forward, Jim, let's look back at the Big Ten Conference, the B1G, baby. Man, it was a fun year. Did it feel for you when Indiana won it that like the Big Ten won it, or was it like, hey, one of the new faces on the block won it? Was it a little different in that regard for you as an a man who lives this game as well?
I would say maybe a little bit of both. I mean, there is kind of like there's that thing. This is the third straight year that the Big Ten has won the national title. The last time they won three straight was what, 1940 to 42, when Minnesota won two in a row, and then Ohio State won one in a row. They've never had it where three different schools have won the national championship 3 years in a row. You look at, kind of comp that to some recent history with the SEC. 2019 to 2021, you had LSU, then Bama, then Georgia. You look back again with the SEC, 2007, 2010, LSU, Florida, Alabama, Auburn. We've seen such a dominance in the sport by the SEC the last 20 years, up until these last couple of years, where the sport has kind of fundamentally changed the rules as far as NIL and transfer and everything else. But I would say that it's harder because what we used to always do in the past when we wanted to be like compare conferences versus conferences, we're like, oh, well, how did they do in the bowl games? And you would start to like match up. Now it's like the teams that play in the bowl games, that team is neither a representation of the team that played that full season, nor a representation of the team that will play the next season.
Yeah. I know.
Like you look at the, USC is a prime example for that. What was the day before, you see the defensive coordinators leaving, and then you see all the guys that are inactive, and you're just like, well, what am I, how am I supposed to take away from this game anything really relatable about how good USC is, how good their opponent is, what that means for each one of those individual conferences? It's just not the same anymore. Does Indiana being at the top of the mountain, does that make the Big Ten kind of the best conference right now? Yeah, I think so. But I think it all depends on the way you look at it. If you look at, this is a conference that is very top heavy right now with, you got three teams finished in the top five, which is something that was much more of an SEC thing in the past. Those three teams, Indiana 16-0. We haven't seen that since Yale over 100 years ago. Oregon, the fifth straight season with 10 or more wins. Both of their losses came to Indiana. Ohio State, they only had two losses this year, or the two teams that were in the championship game. So that top heaviness of the conference is what makes that conference an elite. That next level down is still really good, and whatever. But then as you get towards the bottom of that conference, you start to see some of the more flaws in there, where I think you don't see it quite the same in the SEC. So it all depends on how you view what makes a conference good. Is it the top of the top, or is it from top to bottom?
Yeah, really cool point. So echo a lot of what you said on the Big Ten. Been in that league last couple years, going to stay in that league in terms of broadcasting and calling games for the next couple years, and who knows how long. I think the thing that has jumped out to me most, year one, when I jumped in this league 2 seasons ago when Ohio State won it, the biggest disappointment to me was quarterback play. The most exciting part of it was care factor. Year two, to me, it was the best season of quarterbacks the Big Ten Conference has ever had. And I've checked that with Howard Griffith. Check him out in the most recent episode prior to this. Y Option on the podcast, Jerry DiNardo. These are two guys that were at the Big Ten Network day one about 20 years ago. So they've seen more Big Ten football than I may ever in my lifetime. But I grew up covering the Big Ten and watching the Big Ten and seeing the Kerry Collins of the world and watching different players. I think that is where this thing has grown. Year three, for me, going into it, where it's a separator, Jim, is coaching. It's coaching. Look at the additions in this league. Michigan, Kyle Whittingham. Whoa. I mean, he's Hall of Fame lock. Matt Campbell, Hall of Fame lock. And I don't even think he's 50 yet. Former Pitt Panther, by the way, playing the defensive line back in the day. I saw his name in a program my dad gave me. I have a picture. I'll share on our social later. But you start looking at some of the new coaches within this league. Pat Fitzgerald, Michigan State. He's already, I think, Hall of Famer as a player. So you start looking at like the new coaches within this league, and you're like, whoa, this thing is about to get really real within the Big Ten. And then you look at the coordinators and all these things that we'll talk about in the offseason. But I think that's where this thing has really elevated in a huge way. So you add in revenue, networks, branding, winning the titles, like the whole thing, quarterback play, whoop, and UCLA and Bob Chesney coming from JMU. That's the fourth new head coach, like winners. He's coaching almost 200 games as a head coach. Like he's got a model that we've all seen with Curt Cignetti that we talked about a year ago of like, that may be a model ADs look at of, can you bring half of your team with you that at least may be a inch and a half too short, but Elijah Surratt and Fisher didn't really matter, like two of the best players respectively for IU's championship run. I just think this league is just continually going to grow and separate. In addition, when I talk to players, they want to get to that league. They want to get to that. So there is something to your point of, even if it's a lazy, hey, we've won 3 straight championships, there's a draw that the narrative follows. That's the life in sports media and in just the landscape in which we live in. The thing that will be really interesting when you look back on it is like some of these teams were close too. You look at Iowa, what a season, right? You look at SC. I believe this. SC goes to Illinois and loses a tight game. And SC fans, you know what I'm talking about here. Kamari Ramsey, the morning of the game, has massive food poisoning, doesn't play. You up against Luke Altmaier, who is just dealing. He leads a game-winning drive. I think if Kamari Ramsey plays in this game, you might get one stop and win the game. Now we're talking about CFP USC. Talk about flipping the narrative to your point of losing D'Anton Lynn to Penn State. Michigan, we know the fiasco there with Sharon Moore and company. But again, like true freshman quarterback and Bryce Underwood, I go back to the quarterback point. Like the floor just continues to rise within this league. And then there's just the tough outs. Minnesota, every time. Washington, they were kind of on the doorstep. Like, we'll see what happens as they keep building and finally have some calm waters there over in Montlake, which was great for them because we've all seen Jedd Fisch build. And I get it. We've seen him build and leave. Jim knows that wound all too well. But he also is really good at what they do, and they maintain their staff. Like, I think, again, like you go to, people want to be within the league. And then I think we go to like the disappointments, which I love how, Jim, you've laid this out. We'll put some of this in the descriptor here at yoption.com. Penn State, most disappointing team in the country. Clearly, can't argue that. Team that was preseason, picked to win it all. Obviously didn't, struggled there. Maryland, Michigan State, make changes at Michigan State. Maryland, Loxley coming back. They might have had, in my eyes, had the best freshman in Malik Washington at quarterback. Wisconsin struggling, but they poured resources in. Look what their portal class is crazy. And UCLA and Purdue, they're only going to get better. So I look overall in the season, it was a fun year to call the games because they were competitive as all get out against over 31 score games in conference play. And probably my favorite part of this conference, man, is like every game when you're there feels like it's a title tilt. I called a conference game, Jim, winless Rutgers in conference play, winless Purdue, and it was 95% capacity. It was bonkers. And it finished on the final play of the game. Like, I get like in the grand scheme of the country, nobody's necessarily glued into that one. But I just say from like being in the weeds on it, like it was really enjoyable to go through this year and then finish the season calling the old Oaken bucket. So overall, it was a blast. And I feel like I finally, Jim, know the league. Like I feel like I've got some mastery around like how this league operates.
And it's funny because, you know, the kids these days, they like to do all their little tier lists and stuff like that. So you have your obviously top tier in
sure do.
Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon. Like that is no brainer. Those are 3 of the best programs in the country right now. And then you mentioned that next 3 and that next tier that all finished in the AP top 25. You have Iowa, USC, Michigan. All of them pretty much beat all the teams they were supposed to beat. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have that one win that really propels them. And each one of them had that one non-conference game that could have been the difference.
That's a great point.
Iowa lost to Iowa State, and people will be like, "Oh, Iowa State." But that Iowa State team in week 2 was an elite team. They might have been the best. They would have rivaled Texas Tech for best team in the Big 12 this year without all their injuries. I mean, their whole entire secondary was hurt by, I think, week 4. So if they would have won that game, that would have been a difference. USC going to Notre Dame, that would have been a difference. Michigan going to Oklahoma, that would have been a difference. Any one of those 3 games goes differently. It's a no-brainer like, hey, this is the conference, because not only have they shown it, they've now gone. I think all 3 of those games were on the road too. I can't remember the Iowa State, what that was home or
away. Yeah, it was on the road.
Yeah, so all 3 of those were on the road. They get one of those games, and now it's just like you have that chip to play against those other conferences and be like, nah, we're right there.
That's a good point. You know, when I think of that, I think of like the Indiana factor and all this, like 2 years and look at what they're at. You look at like SC, like there's the pessimist of like, oh my God, Lincoln Riley hasn't been in the playoff in 4 seasons. It's like, come on, look what Cignetti did. And that's a fair take. Like I get that. It's also like a little short-sighted. But I get it. But to your point of like, there's the opportunities are there and the margin for error is so small. Like they drill Michigan at home. One of the best wins, I think, in 4 years at USC. And then they get drilled at Notre Dame. But it was a close game until they give up that kickoff return for a touchdown. And then the trick play that we all know the story there. Things just kind of went awry. And then they had an opportunity again at the end of the season in Eugene, didn't get it. So like they had chances at that. And that's where those teams, to your point of like that next tier, they're going to make those jumps. Now, where I'll challenge that tier is like the tier in like the grand scheme of Big Ten football, Nebraska, Penn State. Like you didn't even say those two teams. Like that's why I think it's so hard. And that's why I think it's going to be such a challenge because all of these donor bases are pouring in to that. You want to call them second tier teams. Washington paid $4 million reportedly to Damon Williams. Oh, what? And it's so hard to get to that next level. And we didn't even reference like the blue blood, like Wisconsin, right? And so I just think it's going to be fascinating to play out. That's why it does feel like every week in the Big Ten, the game matters so much because they're all really tight. When you're calling the games that maybe only like 1 million people are watching that I've been calling recently and not the 20 million that watch Big Noon Kickoff or this 15, whatever it is, like the ramifications for those losses are insane. They really are insane, which makes like coaching so premium and being a nerd on decisions and analytics and all that is just, it makes it fun from the broadcasting standpoint.
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk about bulletproof, and the SEC has been bulletproof for so long, but now that it's 3 straight years with them not having a team in the title game, they had one every year since the original CFP championship game, which was Oregon and Ohio State. They've had at least one team, sometimes multiple teams, in the championship game. They have not gone 3 years without a team in the title game since the 1999 to 02 BCS era game. So there's a little bit there. But when you look at it, like it's still an elite conference. I mean, it's always fun from an SEC outsider to pile on the SEC. And sometimes I get texts from friends who are like, oh, you're being too nice to the SEC. It's like, I get it, but like we still have to live in reality here. Like they still had 4 of the top 9 in the final AP poll, 6 of the top 13, 7 of the top 15. Like they had 7 teams with 10 plus wins. No other conference had more than 4. They had 11 teams qualify for bowl games. Now, granted, going back to what I said before, they were 4-10 in the bowl games, including the playoff, 2-8 against non-SEC opponents. But you also have to think about like, they have a lot of pro prospects that are then opting out of these games because they don't want to get hurt or what have you. But also, to more effect, they have so many teams in the CFP that they get slotted differently in all these bowl games, where normally like this bowl game is SEC number 2 against, let's say Big 12 number 1, or, well, I'm just making things up there. But now SEC number 2 is actually their 5th or 6th best team playing against it. So it's kind of like, it's not really good math in all reality to say like that this is the definer of what the good conference is and not. But they're not up to their own standard right now. And I think that's 100% fair to say because they're not winning these games in the CFP that they have won in the past.
Yeah, I think I will be so curious to see how many teams are double-digit wins next year because thankfully, thank the good Lord in the South that you've gone to 9 conference games. I will also say watching Paul Feinbaum apologize to the Big Ten was hilarious. Also, like, take it a little too serious, right?
Yes.
Like it was like he was reading at a wake and also like, not even going to go there. Also, like, it is
Go
true.
there. Go there.
But we live in a world where Monday to Friday, it's how loud can you scream, which is the whole point of why we created this entire platform, is to not do that, to be thoughtful, to watch the games. I'd love to see SC play any of the other 9 or 10 win teams. Iowa. To be fair, we saw Illinois beat Tennessee in a bowl game. We saw Iowa beat Vandy in a bowl game. Like, it's not like Diego Pavia didn't play. So I just think like I'm with you, like bowl records or whatever. But I also think that within the SEC, they're elite teams. The NFL draft reflects that 1,000%. Also, I'll be so curious to see when we look back a couple of years from now, how many teams are winning double-digit games when you got to play 9 conference games. I just think that's such a big thing. And again, my trauma's talking because we lived it in the Pac-12 forever. And I used to talk to the commissioners of the old Pac-12 and say, please don't. How do we fix this thing? You fix it by not playing 9 conference games because nobody's paying attention to late games anyway. And I say that from experience. Like, there is a bias to the West Coast. Like, I lived it now for multiple years, Jim. Like, we know that's the truth. So now everybody's got to do that. So the equity within the country is finally the same in terms of games played within your respective league. I think that will be critical. See how this thing shakes out. I think the thing I'll remember most about the SEC season is 2 things, really probably 3 things. One, like John Mateer's start. Like, just loved watching him do his thing. I think like the Cougs just keep on giving, right? It was Cam Ward right to the number 1 pick. John Mateer, who by the way is coming on back, right? Which kind of like sneakily hasn't been a storyline for Oklahoma, which I think is kind of cool. So that's 1. 2 is like, I want to give Arch Manning his props. Because after his game to kick off the season against Ohio State, I heard a lot of personalities that lit up him as a recruit, his high school, and how they played. And I saw it was Ryan Clark's comments, and I was like, ooh, Ryan probably knows that high school football way better than me. But also, like, let's let players evolve and develop. And I think by the end of his season, again, it's the most challenging position in all of sport and the most developmental position in all of sport. I'm going to put up a book that is now my favorite book. I read it every night. It's called American Kings. This is like a subtle plug for Seth Wickersham. Not really that subtle. He's going to come on the show here once I finish the book, but it's a great lens into the position. So I think that storyline number 2 is watching Arch Manning navigate so much as the quarterback at Texas to really get comfortable by the end of the year. Like, you saw him like settle in his own, whatever, like who he is. I felt like we saw the purest version of that, which I loved. And then finally, I think it's even at Alabama. I went and visited Kalen DeBoer in the spring, spent a bunch of time with his team. He came on the Big Ten Network set with us, a bunch of sidebar conversations with him and his staff in advance of the Rose Bowl game where they get drilled against Indiana. Yes. But I'll say this, like, for Kalen DeBoer, I know they're under a lot of pressure there, and that's a high-pressure job, and that's life. What he's curated there within the playing field and also without it is awesome. And it's hard to follow, obviously, Nick Saban, but I think they're doing a lot of things there that are really impressive on the development of their athletes, the mental space of their athletes, how they approach the craft of their athletes. I think Kalen DeBoer is top 5 coach in America. I wouldn't even flinch saying that. I guess I get it. They didn't do what they needed to do, but I also think that's the playoff, Jim. The second year of the 12-team playoff, to your point, both years in the semifinals, we have 8 different teams. I just think it's so hard to go win a bunch in a row. I think that's going to be a blueprint that I think we'll continue to see. So that's where my thoughts are. And then, of course, Lane being Lane, I guess is the best way to say that.
Yeah.
What a tough spot to be in. Try to be compassionate and empathetic in terms of trying to figure out where to go next. Drew it out, and it was really nice to see Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss go on a little run. That was cool. Like, watching him compete is something I'll remember from the CFP as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because it made Ole Miss kind of like the good guy in college football for a very short portion of time, because now all of a sudden Dabo Swinney is talking about all the tampering that's going on from Ole Miss. So it's kind of a disaster in there. But I felt like that kind of like overshadowed what was going on in the SEC to an extent. Like, all the talk was about Lane. Well, he coached in this game, whatever. So that was kind of disappointing. But I love what you said about, because I totally agree that he was kind of overblown to start the season, which, so the only thing he could do was fail to meet those expectations. And so as he struggled through some of these early games and even into midseason, but by the end of the year, he was balling out. And like, people were saying if he came out this year, he would still be the number 1 pick in the draft. And I don't necessarily doubt that statement. Obviously he's not coming out. He's going to come back. He's again now have those same expectations he had going into this past season, going into next year. But I think he'll be a lot more equipped for that. They've gotten a lot of good weapons in the transfer portal. We'll talk about that some other day. What I thought was really interesting in the SEC too, you kind of had, you had Georgia, Bama, Oklahoma, all three teams that people kind of projected, maybe Oklahoma a little bit more on the outside, but all projected to make either make the CFP or compete for a CFP spot. Then you had the three teams that were in the preseason top 25 that all really kind of fell on their face: LSU, South Carolina, and Florida. But you kind of had three teams just kind of move in and take those spots in Vandy, A&M, and Ole Miss. So like that's kind of the thing with the SEC. It's like there's just so many teams there, and whoever wins these games is going to be ever. But my favorite stat from the SEC, and it was just crazy, it was the thing that I tracked kind of from probably the midway point of the season on, was Arkansas. I mean, this was a team that went 2-10, lost their last 10 games, and you're like, man, what a dumpster fire this is. But then you really look at it, and I guess this maybe either adds to that claim or subtracts from that claim, and I'm not really sure which. But 6 of those 10 losses were by 6 or fewer points, tied for the most in FBS history. 5 of those losses by 3 or fewer points, tied for the most in FBS history. Like, it was just like, what a heartbreaking year to be an Arkansas fan. And it's funny because, like, I remember when they were getting ready to play Notre Dame, and I was curious because, Notre Dame lost those first 2 games. They're just like, maybe Arkansas like puts the nail in the coffin of Notre Dame for this season, because they had looked pretty good. They had Taylor Green, the Boise State transfer quarterback that was kind of balling out, and Notre Dame put it on them. And I was just like, oh, okay, Notre Dame, I take back all that was the point where I was like, I take back all the disrespect I gave Notre Dame after the first 2 weeks. Like, they're good. And then Arkansas just continually just grinded out that season in the most, I can't imagine being an Arkansas fan, period. But this year, as specifically, with just how brutal a year that was for them.
Yeah, you ain't lying. Okay, so good bridge here. Notre Dame to the ACC. Here we go. Notre Dame is not in the ACC, folks, for football. They play a bunch of games against the ACC, and they'll play a bunch of games next year, and they're going to be really talented again. I think the thing that stood out to me for Notre Dame, before we get into the full ACC recap, Jim, is Marcus Freeman is so impressive. I really think that, man. Like, I don't agree with, like, and I wasn't in the meeting of, like, bailing on their bowl game, only for, like, I think of people like me on the team, like, who was that 5th receiver that was going to get it? Like, you didn't get to, like, even prepare for your career to end if you're a 4th or 5th year senior and you're playing on the core 4 special teams. Like, that part, like, just never felt good to me. And I'm sure it didn't feel good to them either. Clearly, they're talented enough, much like a lot of teams that didn't make the playoff are talented enough to get to the playoff. They didn't do it. I still am a fan of head-to-head, so I subscribe to what eventually happened. If you were going to comp those two, how it happened, the way it happened, all that, we could debate about that all day long, and many people have. But just to put a ball in Notre Dame, CJ Carr, Elite 11 finalist, watching him get that job presented to him in the Notre Dame documentary series on Peacock was really cool. And watching Marcus handle Kenny Minchey saying, you're not going to be our quarterback, was really powerful. And I just think it's a reflection of Marcus Freeman. I've called one Notre Dame game in my career. It was the final one of the Pac-12 network against Stanford, but got to spend time with him in advance of that. And since, of course, you follow Notre Dame just because that's what you do in college football. I just think the way he does it is a really cool model for so many. He killed it on game day in advance of the national championship game. They're not going anywhere. I love how they found a way to navigate the portal, high school recruiting, NIL. Like, there's a world where that could have fallen off a little bit as a high academic institution that really prides itself on that. We've seen that happen with Stanford, which we'll get into in a minute, but they haven't. They've actually just continued to ascend. So they might, like, the hate for Notre Dame might be at an all-time high, but I think Marcus Freeman and whom he is, it's able to soften that, because, like, you want to root for him. Like, my wife is rooting for him. Like, my kids are rooting for him. A part of that is because my wife's Korean. And Marcus is part Korean as well. So we love that in our home. But also on the football front, I'm just so impressed with how he operates, man. So I'm looking forward to watching them take what happened at the end of the season and use it as fuel moving into next year.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like an emotional decision for them not to play, not necessarily the logical decision. Maybe logical is probably not the right word, but it was much more an emotional decision to not play in that game. I mean, let's be real. Jeremiah Love was not going to play in a
For sure.
non-CFP bowl game, and no one would have held anything against him for doing that. I mean, even if you said CJ Carr was not going to play in the bowl game, we're going to give his backup some reps, let him, we're going to get all these 15 bowl practices. We're going to see, kind of start to develop who's going to be the guys for next year. We'd just like to have seen that happen. But obviously they were disappointed that they got out. They were left out. Miami was put in. Obviously, we talked about before, if the new rules were in effect, that would be the opposite.
Yeah.
But Commissioner Phillips probably owes Miami a giant thank you letter for kind of changing the narrative on ACC football in the span of the month, because in the beginning of December, when it's Virginia and Duke playing for the title game, Miami's not anywhere to be seen. And Duke wins, which makes it even that much more uncomfortable for everyone is just piling on the ACC. Now, for one thing, we'll just say, when you have that many teams in a conference, making a tiebreaker that is going to fulfill all of your needs is not as easy as you may think. Trust me, speaking from experience.
Don't read the document, folks. You'll get a headache.
Yeah, major headache. I mean, no matter what you do, there's always the chance of an outlier to come through and get exactly what you just had. I mean, it just is what it is. It is what it is. And I'm sure they're going to address it this offseason and make changes to it. But if you look at the ACC, going back again to bowl records, they finished 9-4 in bowls. In fact, they had the best bowl record around. But you look at some of those wins, it was Virginia over Missouri, Duke over ASU, SMU over Arizona. I know with ASU, they were as injury riddled as it comes. That game was just like a video game back and forth. The Arizona game, SMU was up 24-0. Arizona scored back 19-0 in the second half. It was a game that there was as much controversy about who didn't play for Arizona with their DBs as anything else. So it's, again, what am I taking away from those three results? But when you look at it, Duke was the only Power 4 champ in the last few years not to make the CFP. You had two very high-profile schools in this conference that made a big deal about trying to get out of this conference in Clemson and Florida State. And then to see the two of them both fall completely on their face this year was just crazy. I mean, at one point, Clemson was 3-5. They did wind up finishing 7-6, which was not bad, but that was still their most losses since Dabo's second season back in 2010. Florida State, they were 3-0. They had that big win over Bama. It was like, oh, wow, Florida State, we'll use the term, is back, as everybody likes to say with Texas and Miami and whoever. But then they lost 7 of their last 9. Their first 4 losses kind of in the Arkansas world, all by 8 points or less. So It was just kind of like one of those years where it seemed like anything that could go wrong for the ACC did go wrong until the playoffs started.
Yeah, we've been there with that, right? How many times did that happen back in the day where it was like, oh my God, everything that can't happen started to happen. And you're right, Florida State is remember what happened to Florida State a year ago? They were horrible. And Mike Norvell, who we've known for a long time, coming up at Pitt, and then of course Arizona State is the offensive coordinator, Memphis, where he hired Dan Lanning and was just so incredible with Dan and his wife when she was going through cancer. He's a good man, people. Him and his wife, his family, they're awesome. So you're always rooting for them. And they get the biggest win of week 1, and you're thinking the season. They take down Alabama, and they kind of put it on them. And you're like, good for you, Mike. College football is great when Florida State is back. And then to your point of the games, how tight they were. And that's why I think for fans, I think it's so easy to be like, we got to move on. But you have to look at context, right? USC, Lincoln Riley, the context of their losses. I'd say the same thing for Maryland, the context of their losses, and the young freshman that Mike Locksley has on his staff. Same thing here at Florida State, the context of them. Same thing for my alma mater in Pitt. You're so close every year. And I love the ADs and the people that have voices, at least in Tallahassee, seemingly have context. Okay, I understand what's going on here. Okay, where do we go wrong? Where are injuries? Why were these games tight? What happened on special teams? Let's figure these things out, because you're just a couple moves away, a handful of snaps away. And I think it bodes well for your team. Florida State will be a team really looking forward to watching. Now, Clemson, on the other hand, God, it seems like they like it's like you expect them to, at least let me say, it's like I expect them to win every week because I'm still like a Dabo guy to a certain degree. Like he's won, he's infectious. My dear friend John Gordon is always there, and his signs are all over the facility. And Cade Klubnik, like we interviewed him on this podcast that we haven't even shared that conversation yet because like they just had such a tough start to the season. We didn't even share it because you don't want to pour on and pile on. But an impressive young man. And anybody I've met that have walked through that program, whether it was Trevor Lawrence or backups or Taj Boyd, who's now on the staff, like it's an impressive place. And it just felt like they just can't take the next step. And it's like their truth. And I always say, like, when you watch games without the sound on, you see a team's truth. And their truth is that they are an above average team in the ACC. That's their truth, with an amazing brand and a great fan base. But they've got to find ways to continue to take the steps because I don't think the talent was the issue. To me, when I watched it, it was the messaging of the issue. Not only the messaging of it, but also like I heard about this from many coaches last year. Only one went on the record. It was Mike Locksley saying it was really hard to navigate a locker room when one guy's getting paid this, one guy's getting paid that, and all of a sudden you got no management and you got no hierarchy and you don't have any organizational structure or clarity. And I've always felt this, that the best teams downstairs is where the majority of locker rooms and weight rooms are. Downstairs and upstairs, there is not a massive divide outside of the ceiling and the floor. Upstairs would be the staff, the front office, people that are deciding the financials. Just watching press conferences and the amount of our quarterbacks got to play better. Like there's a part of that that's like the truth of the era we're in. If you're going to make X dollars, I think part of that is fair from people like me. But I don't know about it from coaches because we don't even see that in the NFL when Aaron Rodgers is making X. Like, and get it, they're like grown men and they've been through different fires and turmoils than, say, Cade Klubnik in terms of the grand scheme of things. And within college, Cade has been through a lot. He's a Elite 11 MVP. Him and Quinn Ewers coming out in the same class. Like, we could talk about them for hours. But my point is that when I saw that first initial like social media clip of Dabo, kind of like placing blame, within himself, but also other places, I was just like, ooh, I wonder what this is like at the offensive line apartment or the post-game get-together at a restaurant. Like, it just felt like, yeah, this thing is not as aligned as Indiana, if you want to look at the most aligned place in the country this season. So I'm curious to watch how that thing shakes. I think Dabo will be able to find a way to navigate it because he's malleable. And then I think, so I'll pause there because then I do want to get to Cal and Stanford because I think they're important and we've talked.
Yeah, and you talk about alignment. One thing that wasn't alignment were people's expectations in North Carolina football. Obviously,
yeah, forgot about that. Jeez.
The first year under Bill Belichick did not go as planned, and it was funny because that first game of the season against TCU, and it was ESPN had their not game day, but a game day light at the game. And, the first drive, and it was just like they score, and you have like the Skip Baylesses and every other hot take artist in the world. Oh, Carolina's going to the CFP. And then the rest of the season happened. It was insane. They did not beat an FBS team with a winning record. They finished 4-8. It was their worst record since 2018. Their wins this year were over 1-11 Charlotte, 3-9 Syracuse, 4-8 Stanford, and their one win over a winning team was the FCS Richmond team that was 7-5. So they did not go to a bowl game the last 6 years. The 6 years of the second Mac Brown era, they went to a bowl game every year. So obviously, major disappointment there. But I will say, let's not write them off for next year because obviously we know what Coach Belichick is capable of. There's just some adjusting to what goes on in the college game.
Okay, I'm going to get on a high horse on the adjusting because here's the truth of the numbers. Okay, and we've shared this with our community here at Y Option. 38% of the quarterbacks in major college football last year started at said college. Let me rephrase that. 38% of quarterbacks in college football who were starters who came from their said high school. So only 38% of the starting quarterbacks said, I'm signing with North Carolina, I'm signing with Pitt, I'm signing with whomever out of high school and became starters. That is a low number. Okay. In the Big Ten, there were 5 out of 18. In the ACC, there were 4 out of 16 or 17, whatever the number is. 17. I think 17.
They have an odd number.
4 quarterbacks. 4 quarterbacks. So I think we're in a reality where Big Ten, I understand that ACC or SEC, I think was 7 or 8. I don't have it in front of me exactly. But my point is like the amount of quarterbacks that aren't starting at the place they signed with out of high school is staggering. And the number is only going to get smaller. And I hate when, and I don't use that word often, when head coaches get up there and talk about development, especially at the quarterback position, and then they sign guys out of high school and then they leave and they don't develop. Just don't say it. Or, hey, we're going to develop you to go play somewhere else. Because my advice to quarterbacks now, Jim, is going to be go to a school in the Pac-12. Because you're not going to play at those schools unless you're Bryce Underwood, unless you're a monster, Dylan Raiola, like a freak, like one of those guys that are just ready to play early. Or the coaching staff is going to really develop you, like Arch Manning. You know, like I hate that. And I'm not just putting that on Carolina, but I feel like the NFL model is like, you're not going to draft quarterbacks. I don't even agree with drafting quarterbacks unless they're premium. I wouldn't do it. If I was the Raiders, I get Fernando Mendoza, and I love him. But I might draft Caleb Downs because I think Caleb Downs in a decade will be more Pro Bowls than Fernando Mendoza. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. The numbers would back it up. So I just, when I hear that word development and I hear that word quarterback, I pause because I think it's the most developed position in high school football we've ever seen. And I think it's the least developed we've seen in college at the big time programs. And, you know, North Carolina had an Elite 11 quarterback. He's not there anymore. You know, like, I don't know anything that happened. You know, might have not gone well. Maybe it wasn't a fit. I have no idea. But my point is that, like, freshman quarterbacks shouldn't be transferring. They should be sitting and learning and developing and being poured into. Or just let them know, hey, we just need to take an arm. Okay, cool. Like, I'll take the money and I'll be like, and it's a tough spot to be in if it's Michael Lombardi, I believe, is their GM. It's a tough spot to be in as you're trying to create rosters. Like, it's really hard to do. Like, be Cal right now. You got arguably the best passer in America. He and Dante Moore, Jaron Sagapolitelli, I'd put those two up against anybody in terms of who is the most elite passer in America right now coming back to college football. Or just who was it last year? Jaron's ball, I might say, is the prettiest in the country. So how are you going to get a freshman quarterback to come on in? Like, I get that it's hard to do, but man, God, it bugs me when I see these first-year players transferring to that position. Because that means walked in there and they're like, I got no chance. Their confidence was like something else happened. Something else happened. I don't know what.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Jaron because he technically is a transfer from Oregon. Right. You know what I mean? But to your point, like, he's still going to Cal, whatever. And you know, they had a winning record first time since 2019, but that still wasn't enough for Justin to continue as head coaching job there. You look at Stanford, you know, they finished 4-8 after 4 straight years of 3-9. You talk about freshmen transferring. Eric Bachmeier, the BYU quarterback, he was with Stanford in the spring. But once the quarterback position opened up at BYU, he left during the summer. So it's just interesting how things went for freshman quarterbacks in the Bay this year.
Yeah, that's a really cool point. Like, imagine if Bear and Jaron were the 2 starters. You know, I'm watching the Elway doc on Netflix right now. I don't know if you've seen it. And you remember the old Stanford Stadium. I remember I used to work out there in the summers. I'd come out here to California. I'd come to LA. I'd work the USC quarterback camp. Then I'd drive up the coast, stay with my aunt and uncle, and they lived near campus. And I'd go to Stanford's campus. And back in the day, because it had this huge track, they just kind of let the community in, which I love that idea. Like, I wish more places did that have tracks at their stadium if it's field turf. Very few do, so I get it. But anybody can go there, and I'd work out there on that field. And you'd look up, and I was like, this is huge. Watching the Elway doc, it is packed. And it's just a reminder as you watch Stanford every weekend. To me, it's so sad to see 10,000 people there. And of course, the ACC has a lot to do with that. Stanford not winning has a lot to do with that. The draw in the Bay has a lot to do with that. We know there's a lot to do with that. But I'm excited about them because Andrew Luck is not he's a winner. They seemingly have money. So I just hope that them and Tavita Pritchard have figured out the portal and how to get good quick. Because if you don't, like, the slow build, nobody else is slowly building. And we already know that them and Cal are so limited in the revenue side of the ACC. So we'll see. Tosh Lupoy coming into your point will be exciting with the quarterback they have back. They've done really well in the portal. Stanford, we'll see what signing day is like in February. It's a big day to track. Of all the teams, they're probably the most exciting team to see come the first week of February and who ends up becoming a part of that.
Yeah, and we talk about Baylor. We'll use that to kind of move on to the Big 12 there. And while the ACC has had breakout moments, and including this year in the CFP, the Big 12 is still really waiting for that. Obviously, Texas Tech was not a great showing against Oregon this year. ASU was a great showing last year against Texas in a game they could have conceivably won, had a couple calls gone
targeting
maybe a little bit more accurately. Is that maybe the proper way to say that? But they are 1-8 all time in the CFP. That one win was TCU beating Michigan, and then they got waxed by Georgia in the national title game. I know we were there to witness that one. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 has 2 wins, where the Big 12 only has the one. And you look at this league, and last year, Texas Tech was dominant. I mean, they were such a great team. You look at, they had the school record, 12 wins. They made the CFP for the first time. Their only losses were at ASU in the final minute without Baron Morton at quarterback, and then the Oregon game against CFP. All 12 of their wins this year were by at least 22 points. So they were dominant. And then to see a dominant team in that league just play super flat. The defense was still great against Oregon. No disrespect to the defense, but they were on the field too much. And the offense was just not there. And so it's tough for the league. And we know, and like we talked about, it's tough for the league when your team gets to that level and then just doesn't perform, to be able to say our league deserves more.
Yeah, that's a really cool point. I want to follow up and ask you a question on it. And for all the viewers, we appreciate you watching at yoption.com or on our YouTube channel. Thanks for hitting subscribe. And we'll continue to try to pour into this. This is our full season recap, of course, presented by 76, keeping you on the go, go, go so you never miss a beat. Okay, with that said on Texas Tech, I'm curious if, let's just say this is Arizona, because this is their truth. If somebody, if your dad, who we love, he's a loyal listener, was like, here's $30 million. Let's go buy the best team in the world. Would you be stoked on that? If you didn't win it all, like doesn't matter. Like, doesn't matter on the money side. Yeah. Sorry to your kids. They just lost all their inheritance.
I mean, I have a talk with my dad about apparently having $30 million just laying around. But yeah, I mean, if they're, if all of a sudden my family were billionaires, yeah, sure. I'd be like, yeah, let's pour some money into this and see what we can do out of it. But do the schools in this league have enough of those people to get them over the top? We've seen Kenny Dillingham the whole time of the off season, where his name would come up in every coaching rumor, and he would be like, hey, we need more money. And he wound up, taking every rumor and getting, more money for his assistants and, doing right by that. But I think there was no point where we thought he was actually going to leave Tempe. But are there enough big money donors to compete with these other schools? Obviously, at Texas Tech, they are. I mean, you look at Texas Tech softball; they're paying millions of dollars to softball players to come there. Like, they are breaking the bank in that sport. But they really committed in football this year, and the results were on the field. And it just was disappointing to see how that all ended for them once they got to the CFP.
Yeah, I just wonder, I think in the beginning when it was happening, and David Bailey came, and then so-and-so came, and they were the first one in the quarterback portal, and they got the quarterback from Cincinnati. I think that's the first sentence for Texas Tech of yeah, they bought a team. But I think the second sentence is who cares? We're winning. I really think about it. I live in LA with the Dodgers. We know what their payroll is. Yes, it's a thing, but for fans, we don't give a rip. Go win. And I think that there's it's kind of like how I started about the CFP expanded to 24. All these teams are going to put their best donors in play. You better show that you have a chance to go. So I think you're right on the Texas front of it was exciting, it was fun, and it was disappointing. I hoped that on the 12-team playoff, if there was a change, which didn't happen, it'd be more home games. Because I think if that was in Lubbock, and Dan Lanning, I believe, even said like this game should be
Yeah.
in Lubbock, right? Like
He
they
said
might
that
win.
in the Orange Bowl presser, for, the one leading up to the game with the Orange Bowl background. He's like, no disrespect to the Orange Bowl, but we should be in Lubbock, right?
Yeah, like and they might lose that game in Lubbock, and Oregon dominated that game. I mean, they should have been up. I think it was like 27, 28 nothing at the half. I mean, they just missed opportunities, field goals, went for it on fourth down instead of 10, like whatever. They were not even close to better team, in my opinion. But I think there's something to the format that can aid college football. I love the story of Texas Tech. Kind of always been a sneaky fan of Texas Tech. Like, ironically, I can remember sitting in like the Vons parking lot when they threw the pass to Michael Crabtree and they beat Texas. And I never knew Mike Leach at the time, but eventually we become dear friends. Literally, we had a game at SC. I was coaching, drove home, pulled it in the parking lot, and listened to it on the radio. So always rooting for him. And then you learn more and more. And you read the books, like Bruce Feldman, our dear friend, or Lincoln, spent time there, Cliff. Like it's just a fun place. I've called games there back in the day when I was working for your old employer, Fox College Sports with Sam Ponder. So I've been in Red Raiderville. It's cool. Like definitely pulled up to one of those little, one of those places like you basically get food at like the drive-through, like a gas station, but it's not a gas station. They're like all over Texas.
Buc-ee's?
Yeah, whatever. One of those. Like I feel like they're all in Friday Night Lights. Like you pull in and like somebody comes out of roller skates and you get a meal. But my point is that like they're not going anywhere. Like their coach is impressive. He's really likable. And I think the idea of like Tech's not going to go buy another team. So is everybody else. Like so is everybody else. So it's just part of reality. BYU, I'll say this. I definitely thought Kalani Sitake was going to leave. I was wrong on that. I think Kalani Sitake is a top 10 coach in the country. I think Kalani Sitake would win everywhere, whether it was at UCLA as an opening. Penn State, obviously, rumored to have been like, the language now is amazing. Like Pete Thamel has it nailed. It's like emerging as a front runner means like deal on the table, I think. Like expected to finalize means he signed it. It's amazing to track that because you can read between the lines, but I thought that would be a done deal. And him going to the Big Ten, and he was as far away from the Big Ten in terms of his background and pedigree and places he's won at. But winning travels, discipline travels, his inspiration travels, his humility travels. And I thought it was amazing to watch. I mean, of all the stories, it's not in Indiana is always going to be number one. But if you're ranking stories of the season, I think BYU has to be a top 5 story, Jim. They lose their quarterback due to off the field controversy legally. Like I didn't really track it to know what the outcome of Jake Retzlaff. There you go. His story. He was coming back to BYU, off the field incident. So he leaves, goes to Tulane. Ironically, leads them to the college football playoff. But here's Kalani at Big 12 Media Days that you might have even been at, and he has to deal with like, what am I doing? And he looks it right in the face down the barrel of the camera and doesn't pivot, doesn't block and bridge, just talks about like, this is our scenario. And you're thinking, all right, they're going to probably have a 7-5 season. That's what I thought. And here they go with a freshman quarterback, not wearing a quarterback number, leading the way. And they went to the Big 12 title game. Like, I think I was really impressed. As good of a coaching job, at least in the conversation of top 5, 10 stories of the season.
And a freshman quarterback, as we mentioned, that was not with them in the spring.
Great point. Yeah.
He was at Stanford in the spring, and he just joined over the summer when Retzlaff left. And it's funny because I think if Retzlaff would have stayed, not to say that Retzlaff is better than Bear or vice versa, but I think just from a perception standpoint, I think in the preseason, BYU was lower just because there was the quarterback question. I think that's a very easy, completely fair thing to say. And I think they had to win a lot of games just to overcome that perception of who they were. Now, they did beat Arizona this year. They did beat Utah this year. But they played Texas Tech twice, and they got smoked by them twice. Like you could tell that there was that different level of what that team was. So they just, I know the BYU fans were really disappointed, really thought it was unfair that they didn't make it into the CFP. I think if both of those Texas Tech games were closer, it would have been a different argument. I mean, neither one of those games were close. Like those games, you look at it was 63-14 combined in those two games. And it just felt like they were a really good team, but not just short of that. And then you look at, staying in the state. You look at Utah, 11-2. They had a 6-win improvement over last year. They obviously brought in Jason Beck as the offensive coordinator, Devin Dampier with him from New Mexico. They had one of the best offensive seasons in the history of Utah football, the best in Kyle Whittingham era. So like that was a good thing. You look at some of the other teams. Look at Arizona, had a 5-win improvement from last year under Brent Brennan. It was the 6th time they've won 9 or more games since joining the Pac-12 in 1978. So it was rare territory for the Wildcats, even though they did it 2 in the last 3 years to do that. And you look at ASU, who was the defending champs of this conference, just too many injuries to Levitt and Tyson. I mean, they played good. They played really good when those guys were there. Well, they're 5-2 in the games that Levitt played, 6-3 in the games that Tyson played, but just not enough of the two of them together, which without Cam Skattebo returning, they needed the two of them to really lead that team to the next level again this year.
I'm with you there. Okay, a couple little bows on those teams. Arizona State, I'm talking to the Sun Devil fans. Like, you got the right staff, so just kick back on that. Like, Marcus Arroyo, your offensive coordinator, was a finalist for the Broyles Award last year, the only offensive coach who was in the top 3. You lose your starting quarterback. Very few teams can even survive, and I'd argue that, like, they kind of thrived with Jeff Sims and how he navigated all of that, to your point, losing not only Tyson for a couple games, losing your starting quarterback for a bunch of games, and not having Cam Skattebo. Right. So I would
to that point, Levitt and Sims are not similar quarterbacks in any way. You know what I mean? It's not like they just, let's just go to the backup. Those guys are very different skill sets.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I don't think Arizona State's going to slow down. Like, I think they're a double-digit win team every year. That should be kind of the floors when healthy. Your quarterback's going to play. Like, it's just the truth, folks. Like, you only have so much money. They have a big-time freshman quarterback who just came in from Elite 11 mid-year. So it'll be fun to watch this position as spring unfolds. Arizona, they go 9-4 to your point. Hell of a comeback in a loss in the bowl game. But those other games, BYU game, there's like 2 whack PIs, in my opinion, late in the game. Their other losses, I don't have them exactly, but they were tight, to my understanding, other than Tech.
The Houston loss came right down to the wire for sure. I'm trying to think off of the top of my head who else did we wind up losing to. But yeah, I think all of them were fairly close.
Yeah,
but the Houston and BYU, which wound up both being very good teams, those were both pretty hard. And at the time, you still weren't sure if Arizona was a good team. It was still like you still had the shadow of the year before hanging over you, and it was like that was a close loss, and this was a close loss. And you're like, But then they rattled off a win streak at the end of the season. You're like, oh, Arizona actually is good. And those other teams were good too.
No doubt. And I just want to give Brent Brennan his flowers. I know he wasn't coach of the year in that league, and Tech was the best team, not close in that league. But to get to 9-4 in the style in which they did, coming off of what they did, there was so much noise around that after last season. And it was like, again, I'll go to it. I think in this era, it is so much harder to take over a team that's won when you come from outside the program than a team that hasn't won. I just think it is, because you basically have to speak 2 languages. You're like, to the guys I'm trying to retain, like, hey, it's going to be cool. It's going to be a little bit of what you knew. And then the new guys, like, this is what we're going to be about. And think of the decision he had to make after year 1. 2 new coordinators, maybe 3. I don't know the special teams, so I'd have to confirm on that. But 2 new coordinators. And then he kept his guys this year. Danny Gonzalez coming on back, his OC coming on back. Like, I'm buying Arizona. No, Fafita. That puts a smile on Jim Thornby's dad's face as well, who's now donated $30 million to Arizona's program. And then I think we just got to touch on Colorado. Incredibly disappointing. And I didn't appreciate the way that they managed the quarterback position. Just seemed confusing. The way that Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, has managed the offense, to me, has been inconsistent, right? Sean Lewis comes in as the offense coordinator year 1, basically booted out. The offense coordinator, former head coach of the Chargers, Pat Shurmur, who's a total NFL guy. His son thrives, goes to the NFL. This year, not finding a flow, right? Caden Salter, who we met at the Elite 11, we've known him for a while. They bring in Juju Lewis, who was all everything. They start another random quarterback, like, throughout the season. Like, it just seemed when that room is mismanaged, or when that room is in flux, I should say, because I don't know what went on in that room. But when that room is in flux, in 3 straight weeks, your team is a mirror of that. And that was Colorado. And I do love this about Deion of like, he'll call it like it is. I love that about him. Like, he's actually fun to cover in terms of what he says. I don't cover Colorado on a daily basis, and I'm not on that beat every day, so I don't know what access and all those things that come through it. The point is that, like, he is not going to sugarcoat anything, but it's going to be fun to watch this thing moving forward. They got a new AD at Colorado. As far as I know, Julian Lewis is still on the team, right? The portal is closed, right? So he's going to be he should be the starter. You can spin it. You'll watch him play, and we'll see how, it's elite. He's also really young. He showed up last year mid-year. He's 16 years old. I was there in spring practice. We covered it here at Y Option. So I'll be really curious to see how they do in a league that, again, everybody's just getting better. I hope that the shine war has worn off a little bit at Colorado, but Colorado is one of those brands like Arizona State that can catch fire in a heartbeat. I expect them to be much better. 3-9, not anywhere good enough for the standard under Deion Sanders.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because when you look at that coaching staff, playing accomplishments of that staff, you have Warren Sapp, you have Marshall Faulk, all these guys that have been there, the last couple of years. Like, on that level, it's great. But you also start to question, like, there's not a lot of great players that are great coaches. It's always the guys that were kind of had to just grind because they didn't have that talent, and they understand that. Like, Michael Jordan was never a coach. Magic Johnson was not a great, head coach. Just thinking of that, like, you don't look at the NFL and you're not picking out, Jim Harbaugh was a pretty good NFL player. Beyond that, there's not a lot of great NFL players coaching NFL teams.
Yeah.
It's just something, there's just something about that. So I'm not saying that these guys are not good coaches. I think time will tell over that, but it is definitely a different formula that they're trying to do. And obviously that worked 2 years ago when they had Shedeur and they had Travis Hunter and they had all these receivers that are now in the NFL. But I don't know if it's sustainable. We've seen Jordan Seaton, the left tackle, now going to LSU, who was, if not the highest, one of the highest rated recruits in the history of that program. So it'll be interesting to see if their coaching style, both on the field and in recruiting, is able to maintain itself in this kind of new world.
Yeah, okay. Let's put a ball on that, and then we'll get to the Pac-12. I think this for all the teams in the Big 12 and in the ACC, and I'd love to know this. Maybe On3 can help us figure this out. What is your budget post rev share? I just think there's a truth there, Jim, of like, we're playing in a different game. Colorado and LSU, from a spend standpoint, I'd imagine totally different planets.
You are correct.
I think I am correct, right? Like, that is a truth, folks. So coaching, I don't know. I was there last spring. I was incredibly impressed. Both sides of the ball, sat in on meetings, and would be impressed in every one of these rooms. I think coaching is a thing that gets so criticized, and I don't think fans really understand what goes into it. It's probably the kindest way, most thoughtful way to say that. These coaches are so smart. Remember Aaron Roderick at Utah? He was getting crushed. Look what he's doing at BYU. Like, coaches grow, coaches develop. They're really impressive. I think the biggest challenge for a staff now, especially at a place like Colorado, I know at a place like USC, a place where the lights are a little bit brighter. It's probably going to be the same at LSU now with Lane Kiffin as a head coach. I call it internal reality versus external reality. And I talked to Lincoln Riley about this. Go back and search our podcast. Check it out on YouTube. Like, put it in. You'll see the conversation directly. When externally, you're going to play for Coach Prime, and externally, you're playing in LA, and externally, you're playing for Lane, there's a reality around that. Like, you're sweet. Internally, you don't line up behind the line. You don't know the playbook. You struggle navigating class, time management, social life, mental health, like all things that are really the realest thing for being in college. Those two things clash more often than I think people realize. And when they clash, you just have no chance to maximize your potential. It's why I think SC is one of the hardest places to coach in America. And I get it, folks. It's the best job in the country. You got new facilities. You got all the money. You got palm trees. You're right. But external and internal clash all the time. Since 1980, USC has 6 10-win seasons outside of Pete Carroll. You add in Pete's 7 seasons, that's 13 since 1980. Like, it is hard to do. You'll always have elite players, but it's hard to do. Okay, that's one. point two is that I do think if your budget is nowhere near some of these other places, like the Texas Techs of the world, if you're at Colorado or if you're at Stanford, you're developing so those guys go get paid a ton. It's just that's where we sit in the era of 1-year contracts or 2-year contracts and buyouts. Are you going to buy it out? Like, that is the truth. And that'd be the first question I would ask if I was Pete Thamel or if I was any of our friends, Nicole Arbach, that are like also reporting instead of just X and O analysts like it is my job. How much money do you have? How much money do you have? That's the first question players are asking. You know how many parents, coaches, and GMs are meeting? It's like a 75% drop off from what it was 5 years ago because they're just meeting the agents. GMs are doing the deal with the agent's presenting to the family and the player, and that's what the reality is. It's just this. It's just the truth. I'm not even gonna say the sad truth. It's just the truth. It's a different game. That's just kind of like my thought for like when your team isn't doing well and you're pissed or you're frustrated and you want to take it out on the staff. Your staff's probably really good, but there's probably a lot of their stuff like going on. We talked about it in Clemson. There's not alignment everywhere, and it's a different set of rules everywhere. There's a different budget everywhere. It's just different, and I think that's going to be really challenging for teams to sustain success, but also it's going to be really exciting for us because we might see another 8 teams in the or another 4 teams in the semifinals next year that have never been there before, which might, to your first point, might be great for college football.
Yeah. And it's funny too, when you said agent, like I'm thinking in my brain, I'm putting the air quotes around agent on some of these.
Yeah, cousin, uncle.
There are some legit, like, don't get me wrong, there are some legitimate agents in the game that are doing things in here, but a lot of times you're just like, oh yeah, this guy told me I should go in the portal and do it.
Let me give you a story on that, just for fun, because it's a fun little break before we get to the Pac-12 here in our full, true season recap. Again, thank you all for spending time with us, and hopefully you took a week to chop this up and listen to it however you wanted to. I talked to a coach over the weekend where he's recruiting a player. Player said agent is like, hey, rival school just offered, let's just throw numbers out, offer me $800,000. The coach was like, really? We offered you 4. And the coach is like, hey, you got to meet the number. Coach hangs up, calls the GM of the other team and is like, hey, did you offer him 8? And they're like, nah, 300. And he hung up. And that is the point, is like there's constant leverage, call it lies, call it the game, call it whatever you want, that are happening. And I just go back, and Pat Chun is such like a great proponent of this because he's been in all these committees. Mark Jackson, the same deal, the AD at Washington and Northwestern respectively, and probably every AD in the country, of like, we need a little bit more clarity on this thing so we can find some sustainability. And also, most importantly, we'll go back to the player lens, consistency in their own lives and not hyperbolic, because your world's hyperbolic, your playing's going to be hyperbolic, and your life's going to feel that way. And that is not a sense of success for anybody's reality over the long term. With that said, the long term, they've got it now in the Pac-12, right? At least for the foreseeable future. Jim, you like the transition from 2 teams to a full league. We got a new league. Let's look back before we look forward. What do you think about the Pac-12?
Well, it's funny because, we started the show talking about the CFP and the change of the format and all the rest of that stuff. And that obviously makes things a little bit harder for what the Pac-12 is trying to do. But when you look at what the American Conference did this year, they did a great job. They had several teams, in the running towards the end of the season that were, ranked. Obviously, Tulane was the one that got in, but you had North Texas, you had Navy, you had Memphis, all these schools that are kind of in contention. And so now the Pac-12 is looking at that, and they hopefully, as you see, a lot of those head coaches and star players from those teams in the American now going to whether it's the SEC or Oklahoma State or what have you. Now it's like the Pac-12 is like, okay, this is going to be our turn to like take this over, because you look at what happened this last year with the Pac-12, and it was obviously 2 teams. It was not the results that they wanted. You look at Washington State; they finished 7-6, but they did make a bowl game for the 9th time in the last 11 seasons. 5 of the 6 losses were to teams that had 9 or more wins. 4 of those losses were to teams that had 11 or more wins. They took Ole Miss, they took Virginia, they took James Madison, all on the road, right down to the wire. Obviously, Ole Miss and James Madison made the playoff. Virginia was a win away because they were in the ACC title game from making the playoff. So it was almost there for them to have a really successful season. Obviously, things didn't turn out well at the way that they wanted at the end when Jimmy Rogers left for Iowa State. Then you look on the other side with Oregon State, definitely not what they wanted this year. 2-10, seven of those losses were to teams with winning records, including 2 again on the road to teams that made the CFP in Texas Tech and Oregon. But now both of those schools are ready to turn the page with new head coaches. You got Kirby Moore, the Missouri offensive coordinator who played at Boise State with his brother Kellen Moore, coming to the Palouse. So you got that local, feel to it there. You have Jamarcus Shepard, a Pac-12 veteran who has been the Alabama the wide receivers coach the last 2 years, and who was at Washington prior to that, and Washington State even previous to that, coming into that. So I think there's a lot of energy with those 2 teams, even before we get to the other new teams.
Yeah. Well said. I think, again, we started this when the Pac-12 fell apart in its old form of 100 plus years. And the whole idea was to create a community for people to come and celebrate the game that we love. What 2 teams had to do was survive. If we're going to be honest, what Washington State and Oregon State had to do, had to piece together a schedule and survive. And part of that was like, we are a Power 4 team. So we're going to go play those teams. And part of that is also like, we're getting poached. And not even poached. Like that's just the game. Like players are going to go. And also you're going to gain players. And they both did that respectively and navigated that. I think looking back on it, I'd wonder if we talked to at least Scott Barnes, who's been on this show, like, was it harder than you anticipated? Was it exactly what you anticipated? Definitely wasn't easier. Think about what they had to go through. Like if you would have said when Trent Bray got the job, he was going to be out before they started the new look Pac-12, I would have said, I'd take the bet. There's no chance. An alumni, guy who's, obviously well regarded, adored there, and did well there as a defensive coordinator. But it just got so challenging that they make the change in season. And now they net out, to your point, with a guy in Jamarcus Shepard, who's just on this show, by the way, one of our highest performing shows. Thank you all for watching that. At a place where he wants to go lead. And then on the flip side, here's Washington State, to your point, like they almost had the Pullman magic. Like you're watching those games and you're like, whoa, they're about to take down Lane and Ole Miss. They're about to your point, like shock the country. They were right there on the verge of doing that. And then they had, some losses. They were like, oh. So I just look at that team and both of those teams, and I just have such regard for their fan bases and the people that are still there of hanging. Because now they enter this new look Pac-12. And when we asked this to Jamarcus Shepard, he started laughing about it. Like, hey, you went from Oregon State, chip on the shoulder, overlooked, that has kind of been their DNA in the old Pac-12, to now like you're the leader in the clubhouse. You're like the de facto USC in the old Pac-12. You're the de facto Ohio State, Michigan in the Big Ten. You're the de facto Alabama, Georgia in the SEC. He was like, no. Like we're still chip on the shoulder program, and that chip is massive. So I'll be curious to see how they navigate that. But if you look at this league, I think you have to be excited about it. Number one, because you want to support a historic brand under Teresa Gould's stewardship that has found success, survived, and now will be on 3 different networks, has a coaching staff that we'll get into that I think is really impressive. Again, you go back to coaching within this new look Pac-12. And now with the 12-team format, they're alive to go get that berth. And I think it's important to note that, because I think under the radar, amid all the change in the CFP, I think there was some nervousness of like, hey, what's going to happen based on the Group of Five's performances in the last 2 years in the CFP. So I think the Pac-12 has come out of this thing optimistic, excited, with Wazoo and Oregon State as the leaders and the faces of this new look league, which I think is going to be a really fun league every Saturday.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the momentum that these 6 other programs have now coming into this season, it's different for each kind of one. But you look at it, you kind of go down the list here. Boise State, they've won the last 3 Mountain West championship games. I mean, they have been the cream of the crop outsider in college football for 25 years. They're the Gonzaga of the Gonzaga men's basketball of college football, the team that's just been the outsider and continues to win.
I like that.
You look at San Diego State; they went 9-4 in their second season under Sean Lewis this year, a +6 win improvement. You look at Fresno State; it was their first season under Matt Entz, +3 win improvement. Utah State, they made it to a bowl game in their first year under Bronco Mendenhall. They were 6-7 because they actually lost to Washington State in the bowl game. So pack on pack crime there, but +2 win improvement. Texas State, they went 7-6 in the third season under G.J. Kinney. It's their third straight bowl game. They won all 3 of those bowl games. They had never gone to a bowl game before these 3 years. So again,
get in the river,
teams,
jump in the river.
All of those have momentum. And the one school that you look at, if you just looked at their record from last year, Colorado State, they were 2-10 last year. It was their worst year since 1988. But they bring in Jim Mora, who is obviously a very seasoned veteran coach of the Pac-12. Coached at UCLA, played at UW. And then you look at what him coming up from UConn and what he did at UConn. They won 9 games each of the last 2 years. They won a combined 9 games his first 2 years there as he was trying to build that back up. They had not finished with a winning record since 2010 before that. So he is just getting that ball rolling. It took a little time because it's not easy when you're an independent team to kind of really build that momentum. But you got to think that that brighter things are going to come at Colorado State with Jim Mora at the helm there. So each one of these 8 schools you look at and you see that there's no one where you're like, I don't really like the direction of what that program is right now. Each one of them has something that you can really hang your hat on and say, oh, I can point to this as why I can believe that they can compete in this conference.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch this league shake out once they release their schedule. Who plays who, when they play, where they play. And I only say that because the old Pac-12, it was so competitive. It's like I comped it to the Big 12. Like when I talk to our friends in the Big 12, I'd be like, hey, I know I live that life, bro. Like everybody's good. I look at this league and to what I referenced of like Wazoo and Oregon State being the faces of this league. And are they the favorites every year? Well, you got 2 first-time ever head coaches. You're remaking your rosters, your staffs. No reason to think they can't because they have the resources seemingly, and they have the facilities, and they have the core nucleus of what it's going to take to go win. So does Boise State, to your point. So does San Diego State. Fresno State is sneaking under the radar. And then I look at the head coaches, to your point, and what I said earlier about the Big Ten. The coaching is just elevated. Like Jim Mora, come on now, 2-time NFL head coach. Last time UCLA had a dramatic amount of success, he was the head coach. Like, obviously what he did at UConn, not being an independent. I mean, what they did there for multiple years. I've stayed in touch with him since we did the doc series, The Drive. If Colorado State wants a little insight into him, listen to our podcast that we did a couple weeks ago. And then YouTube, like UCLA and The Drive, because you'll see behind the scenes how intense he is, how fiery he is. Most importantly, his teams always play really good football. Bronco Mendenhall, Matt Entz, like winners everywhere they have been. I've known GJ, like he's one of those young tracking, like he's your Kenny Dillingham of the league to a certain degree. And then we've got these 2 new faces in Wazoo and Oregon State. And oh, by the way, here's San Diego State and Sean Lewis, who's rumored for jobs every year. Like it is a really well-coached league. What I expect to happen is and I think this will catch the country by surprise a little bit, but not the people out west. I think Saturdays are going to be awesome in this league because I think the fans are going to show up. I think the way the league's going to do it, in terms of like scheduling, timing of games, like everything that we're kind of anticipating, it's going to make it a really appealing, it's a really appealing game. I think the marketing of it, I think the presentation of it, I think all those things. And then I think the game's really competitive. And then you look at the stadiums, like, you see the thing on AI when it's like, look at this stadium made by AI. Like you have to do that at Colorado State. Like it is dope. Like go down to San Diego, see their stadium. So I just hope like the fan bases show out, and I expect them to do that. And if so, I think Saturdays in this league are going to be awesome. The challenge is, and I don't know what we want. Like, would you rather like 30 conference games decided by a score or less, or would you rather Boise be 12-0? I get it, like in the world we live with CFP, et cetera. But I think this league every week is going to be really fun
You kind of need that one team to
Of
kind of,
course.
to be like what Texas Tech was in the Big 12 this year, so that you have that no brainer. Okay, we're getting that team in the CFP. Because at the end of the day, that's your goal. You want to have a team make the CFP, and you're going to be, the way that they've changed the the formula of the CFP. You're competing with the American. You're competing with the Sun Belt. You're competing with the Mountain West.
So here's that question. Like, do you think the
That.
Pac-12 is like, do you think I wonder in the college football zeitgeist and in the room with the committee, because the committee is going to remain the committee. When they look at those other leagues that you just referenced, is the Pac-12 slotted already above them?
I think so, based on what these.
I think so too.
I think on what these 8 schools have done in the transfer portal era. If you look at the winning percentage of the bowls and everything else, I think they have a slight edge over the rest of those schools. I actually think they're probably closer to the ACC and the Big 12 than the ACC and the Big 12 are to the SEC and the Big 10.
So then the thing that goes next is like, and they all probably have their non-cons done, but if you're those schools, are your non-cons teams from those other conferences, Group of 5 conferences, or are you going to play a Big 10 school? Oregon State aren't going to play next year. So I don't know the best way to approach that. I do know this. I couldn't tell you more than one team that JMU beat. I couldn't tell you more than one team that Tulane beat. I could tell you their record at the end of the season. So there's always that dance, right? And now we're in this world of like, do you want to go play said school, Texas Tech? Do you want to go and play Ole Miss? Like, I get that as a player. Love that. Who doesn't? But I'm just kind of curious how it shakes out. Because I think the conference play is something that I believe the committee will respect because they'll know more than somebody living in the state of Florida. They're not going to clue.
It's that risk reward. I mean, it's like, are you better off trying to schedule the bottom half of the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, ACC, trying to pick off those schools? Not that those, it has to be a benefit both ways. I mean, obviously, I don't think we're going to see any Pac-12 Mountain West scheduling agreement anytime soon, based on what's occurred the last couple of years. But I think you want to, it doesn't do you any good to get waxed by Ohio State or Georgia. Like that's not,
or play Lafayette. Like it does. Like they had to do that to just find a game. So you're right. It's a dance, man. Like it is hard.
It's that narrow avenue, and it has to be both ways. Just because you want to play that school doesn't mean they want to play you.
I wouldn't want to play a Pac-12 school. Like if I'm Purdue, I don't want to go back to Corvallis. Like zero chance am I walking into that. Like
you're going to probably have to do that on the road.
Totally. Yeah, we already got to play 9 conference games. So we'll see. We'll see how this shakes out. But either way, and I think the country will celebrate. We said it last year, went on Cowherd Show and said I thought that like Wazoo and Oregon State were America's teams. And I felt like the country was rooting for them 2 years ago. I think this past year, obviously, Oregon State struggled mightily early on. That ship sailed. Wazoo, it was tough early on. They had an early loss, and that ship kind of sailed. I think college football and the college game days of the world, the big noon kicks out of the world, like the CBS, all the pregame shows, us now at NBC, like I think it's good when Pac-12 can provide a legit champion. And I love that. So that's where we sit.
And it's funny, you think back 2 summers ago when we were in Vegas and, Jake Dickert and Trent Bray were on the stage. They were talking about, the fight for the Pac-12 and, continuing on. And now to think, if you would have told us then that now Jake Dickert would be the head coach of Wake Forest and Trent Bray would be the defensive coordinator at Washington State. I mean, that just goes to show the absurdity of this.
Totally. And I will say this because I think probably the vitriol on Jake has calmed since leaving Washington State because it happened to them again. What a great job. You want to talk with top 10 coaching jobs in the country. Jake Dickert, he's a hell of a coach, folks. Look at what he did, and Wake Forest locked him up. And as you project ahead, if you project hot seats and all that stuff, which we don't really do here, there's a team where there might be a hot seat in the state in which Jake Dickert grew up, and seemingly Wake Forest locked him down. I know him and his family really love their time there and the community, and I think it's important to recognize that, and it's okay. We get emotional. I got a message the other day. You'll love this. I got an email the other day of like, "Dear Yogi, I said some very inappropriate things after. I'm not going to say which game I called about you and how bad you were, but I've been following and listening, and I just want to say that I apologize and you're thoughtful. And I was like, it's cool, man. Like, you might have lost $100. So I think it's okay for all of us to be emotional
in the moment.
Yeah. What's the coaching line? Like, play with emotion, don't be emotional, right? Like, we could all heed some of that advice, me included, folks.
Definitely me. I'm definitely on that track.
I love it. Well, this was fun. Jim, I expect you to send in, and anybody listening, send in your best play, okay? We got another game, 5-year-old basketball league this coming weekend. I'm a head coach. We're 1-2 on the season. Even though they don't keep score, we always keep score. Okay, we're 1-2, trying to get to 500. You have a play, an out of bounds play, send it in us on social media. This is our longest episode in a long time, but it was fun to kind of do a brain dump. So let us know your thoughts on that. And we got some fun things coming for you here at Y Option. So if you haven't yet, over the course of this hour and 45 minutes, subscribe to YOption.com. Do it now. Do it now, folks. All right, more soon. Jim, that was really fun, man. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely.
All right, there it is. Jim Thornby. I'm Yogi Roth. And of course, big love to our founding sponsor, 76, keeping you on the go, go, go so you never miss a beat.